Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1942 Black Budgets. The financial engine of secrecy, black budgets, USAPs, and the UAP Paradox. When we trace the arc from Jack Frost's 1952 tabletop experiments with compressed air to modern legislative battles over executive transparency, we hit the ultimate bedrock of the entire UFO mystery, the black budget. In alternative history and investigative ufology, the phrase black budget is often thrown around like a magical incantation. But behind the conspiracy lore lies a very real, highly structured mechanism of American statecraft. Understanding how unacknowledged funding works is the only way to make sense of how projects like Project Silverbug, AAWSAP, and modern digital vaults like Immaculate Constellation can exist entirely outside the gaze of public accountability for decades. The institutional origins of the modern black budget and classified special access system did not happen overnight. They were forged in the crucible of World War II and the immediate onset of the Cold War between 1942 and 1949. The literal blueprint for the modern black budget began with the Manhattan Project during World War II. To build the atomic bomb in absolute secrecy, the Roosevelt administration needed billions of dollars without itemizing it in public congressional ledgers. They hid the funding inside innocuous-sounding, highly padded military procurement accounts, funneled through the Army Corps of Engineers. It proved that the U.S. government could successfully siphon massive amounts of taxpayer money into an ultra-secret, compartmentalized project completely hidden from public oversight and most of Congress. When World War II ended, the geopolitical panic of the Cold War with the Soviet Union prompted the U.S. government to institutionalize wartime secrecy permanently. Congress passed the National Security Act of 1947, which officially established the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, NSC, and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. This act provided the foundational legal framework, allowing intelligence agencies to operate with confidential funds that did not have to be accounted for under standard federal transparency rules. The definitive starting point for the modern unacknowledged financial apparatus came 2 years later with the CIA Act of 1949. This legislation granted the CIA Director extraordinary legal authority to transfer funds from other government agencies such as the Department of Defense, without regard to any laws prohibiting the expenditure of public funds. It effectively built the permanent, legally protected financial wall known today as the black budget, ensuring that future unacknowledged special access programs, USAPs, would have a permanent, unauditable mechanism to hide their activities from both the public and congressional oversight. What began as an emergency wartime measure for the atomic bomb in 1942 was permanently codified into law by 1949, creating the financial engine that would fund decades of classified aerospace research, experimental aircraft like Project Silverbug, and deep state intelligence operations. Here is the deep dive into how black budgets fuel the UAP enigma and why the money trail is always more revealing than the physical wreckage. A black budget refers to classified government expenditures allocated for intelligence, defense research, and covert operations whose exact amounts, line items, and contractors are hidden from public view. The framework was officially codified during the early Cold War, cemented by legislation like the Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949, allowing certain agencies, primarily the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, to transfer funds without standard congressional itemization. Within the military-industrial complex, standard classified programs are known as SAPs. However, the true apex of secrecy is the USAP. The existence of a USAP is legally denied to anyone without a specific, highly restrictive need to know clearance. Whistleblowers have repeatedly testified that these programs operate on carve-outs, meaning they are legally exempt from standard audits, routine congressional committee oversight, and Freedom of Information Act (FOI) requests. For decades, the central question asked by skeptics has been, if the government has been reverse engineering non-human craft since the mid-20th century, how do you hide a multi-billion-dollar R&D project without it showing up on federal balance sheets? According to financial investigators, aerospace historians, and congressional whistleblowers, black budget projects hide in plain sight through several sophisticated mechanisms. Much of the cutting-edge aerospace work, dating back to Avro Canada and Project Silverbug, isn't executed directly inside government military bases. It is farmed out to private defense contractors, the aerospace primes, under compartmentalized subcontracts. Billions of dollars are routinely shifted around using misappropriation or padded line items within massive authorized defense budgets, like aircraft carrier overhauls or radar system upgrades. A few $1,000,000 here and there vanish into administrative overhead, feeding long-term unacknowledged research projects. Independent Research and Development (URAD) funds allow defense contractors to use government-approved overhead funds to explore radical tech concepts without specific prior government authorization. This creates a cozy, self-sustaining loop where private corporations can fund unconventional propulsion or material science research with taxpayer money, while maintaining absolute corporate trade secret protection. The modern push for UAP disclosure, marked by congressional hearings, whistleblower protections, and executive branch executive orders, ultimately exposes a massive constitutional friction point. Who actually controls the government? When executive directives, interagency task forces such as historical pursue efforts, or modern declassification portals, and bipartisan congressional committees demand access to hidden UAP databases, they are met with a wall of institutional resistance. This resistance doesn't necessarily stem from malevolent men hiding little green men in a basement. It is often driven by bureaucratic self-preservation and compartmentalized inertia. Once a USAP is created, its access lists are managed by internal program managers rather than elected officials. Over decades, these lists become self-perpetuating loops that outlive presidential administrations, intelligence directors, and congressional terms. Furthermore, if exotic materials or river-engineered technologies are held by private defense contractors under corporate trade secret law rather than direct military classification, traditional executive authority hits a brick wall. A president can declassify government documents, but compelling a private corporation to surrender proprietary physical assets protected by corporate law is an entirely different legal battleground. When we look at the sweep of history, from Jack Frost's saucer blueprints in 1952 to the algorithmic vaults of modern intelligence, we see that the true guardian of the UFO secret was never a men in black operative with a memory-wiping flashbulb. As long as black budgets remain opaque and unacknowledged special access programs can operate behind impenetrable financial walls, the line between what human engineering can build, like Project Silverbug, and what the universe has dropped at our doorstep will remain fiercely guarded. The ultimate mystery isn't just what is flying in our skies, it is how a democracy can keep secrets from itself for nearly a century. The intersection of the black budget and 9/11, the Rumsfeld announcement. Few moments in modern history bridge the gap between bureaucratic financial opacity and national trauma, quite like the events of September 10th and September 11th, 2001. In alternative history circles, internet forums, and investigative deep dives, this 24. Our window is frequently cited as one of the most astonishing coincidences or calculated cover-ups in the history of the military-industrial complex. Here is the deep dive into what actually happened, the famous speech that preceded the tragedy, and how it intersects with the legacy of the Pentagon's black budget. September 10th, 2001, the $2.3 trillion admission. On the afternoon of September 10, 2001, newly appointed Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld stepped up to a podium at the Pentagon to deliver a speech that would normally have triggered a massive political earthquake. Instead, it vanished from the headlines less than 24 hours later. Rumsfeld wasn't talking about foreign terrorists. He was declaring war on the Pentagon's own internal bureaucracy, calling the sprawling defense establishment an adversary, just as dangerous as any foreign threat. Rumsfeld dropped a stunning statistic that had previously been buried in a 2000 Pentagon Inspector General audit report. The Department of Defense's financial management systems were so archaic, fragmented, and incompatible that the military could not adequately track $2.3 trillion in transactions. Mainstream financial analysts and government watchdogs quickly clarified that the $2.3 trillion figure did not mean piles of physical cash had vanished or been stolen. Rather, it represented a cumulative mountain of poorly documented accounting adjustments, unverified journal entries, and mismatched ledgers caused by decades of incompatible computer systems across different branches of the armed forces. However, to the public and to researchers tracking black budget USAPs, the admission was staggering. It proved that the world's most powerful military had virtually no internal financial accountability. September 11, 2001, the physical impact on the ledger. The very next morning, the world changed forever. Commercial airliner American Airlines Flight 77 struck the western wedge of the Pentagon. The section of the Pentagon hit by the aircraft heavily damaged offices belonging to the Pentagon's Navy accounting and resource management personnel, some of whom were actively working on compiling and reconciling defense audit data. In the weeks and months that followed, internet sleuths and alternative researchers quickly connected the dots of the calendar. The narrative took root in conspiracy lore that the destruction of those offices, combined with the sudden burial of Rumsfeld's missing trillions speech under mountains of breaking news about terrorism, conveniently wiped out the paper trail for decades of black budget spending, Unacknowledged Special Access Programs, USAPs, and secret aerospace projects. While the literal physical destruction of audit offices on 9/11 did not erase digital database backups housed securely offsite, the geopolitical shift that followed fundamentally altered the trajectory of government transparency. Overnight, the national security apparatus pivoted entirely. Congressional committees stopped asking questions about missing accounting ledgers and antiquated software systems, funneling trillions of dollars into immediate wartime appropriations, intelligence expansions, and homeland security infrastructure. To this day, the Department of Defense remains the only major federal agency that has never successfully passed a comprehensive financial audit. Decades later, independent auditors continue to find hundreds of billions of dollars in assets and transactions that cannot be fully accounted for. Whether viewed through the lens of bureaucratic incompetence or the ultimate firewall for deep state secrecy, the events of September 2001 cemented a permanent truth. The black budget operates behind a wall so high and fortified that even a Secretary of Defense could declare war on it, only for history to sweep it away overnight. When people hear that the Pentagon had $2.3 trillion missing, the mental image is usually cinematic: pallets of shrink-wrapped cash disappearing into secret warehouses or underground vaults. However, according to government auditors, financial analysts, and the Department of Defense's own Inspector General reports, the money didn't literally vanish into thin air, nor was it physically stolen. To understand where that staggering figure actually went, you have to look at how bureaucratic accounting, and the lack thereof, works inside the world's largest military machine. When Donald Rumsfeld stated on September 10, 2001, that the Pentagon could not track $2.3 trillion in transactions, he was referencing a formal audit report from the DoD Inspector General covering fiscal year 1999. The core issue wasn't missing piles of cash, it was a catastrophic failure of bookkeeping software. For decades, each branch of the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines operated on entirely different, highly outdated, and often proprietary financial management software systems. When money moved between these disparate systems, such as transferring funds from an Air Force account to pay a Navy contractor, the digital handoffs frequently broke. To make their annual ledgers balance out at the end of the year, military accountants were forced to plug in massive blocks of estimated numbers, called unsupported journal vouchers or plug figures. An unsupported entry means that money was spent on real things: salaries, jet fuel, weapons parts, ship maintenance, and building contracts. But the matching receipts, paper trails, or electronic invoices were either lost, misfiled, or generated by systems that couldn't talk to each other. Think of it like a massive corporation, where a regional manager spends $100,000 on office supplies, but instead of keeping the receipts, the accounting department just types miscellaneous expenses, $100,000 into the computer, so the books balance. Multiply that sloppy bookkeeping by thousands of departments over many years, and the cumulative total of those mismatched, undocumented accounting adjustments snowballed into $2.3 trillion, and later, By the mid-2010s, independent researchers calculated that cumulative unsupported adjustments across the DoD had ballooned past $20 trillion. While the vast majority of the $2.3 trillion represents sloppy routine paperwork, bureaucratic waste, and redundant software systems, financial investigators and alternative researchers point out a crucial gray area. Because the Pentagon's accounting systems are so universally fragmented and impossible to audit, it provides the ultimate cover for legitimate black budget and unacknowledged special access programs, USAPs. When American Airlines Flight 77 struck the western side of the Pentagon on the morning of September 11, 2001, the physical and human losses were devastating. To understand what was lost, both officially and in the context of the institutional questions surrounding the building, we have to look at the exact location of the impact and the personnel stationed there. The most tragic loss was entirely human. A total of 184 people died as a result of the Pentagon attack. 59 passengers and crew aboard Flight 77, including all 5 hijackers. 125 people inside the Pentagon, a mix of military personnel, civilian defense employees, and contractors. The aircraft struck the first floor of the Pentagon near the outer ring, the airing tearing diagonally through Wedge 1. The immediate impact zone housed 2 critical hubs. The Navy Command Center NCC. This was the active 24-hour nerve center used to monitor and manage global naval operations. Of the 50 to 70 people typically on duty there, 42 Navy personnel, military and civilian, lost their lives. Resource management and comptroller offices, also located within the impacted section, were budget analysts, resource managers, and civilian accountants, including personnel from agencies like the Defense Intelligence Agency. DIA Controller's Office. The convergence of what was lost with Rumsfeld's September 10 financial announcement is precisely what fueled decades of speculation. Conspiracy and alternative history theories often claim that the physical files or computer servers containing the proof of the missing $2.3 trillion were wiped out in the blast. Government investigators and technical experts quickly clarified that financial records, database backups, and accounting ledgers were not physically stored on local desktop hard drives in that single wedge of the Pentagon. They were backed up on secure mainframe servers located elsewhere or stored off-site. While the digital ledgers weren't physically vaporized, what was lost was the immediate momentum of oversight. The attack abruptly ended any possibility of a rigorous, aggressive congressional or public investigation into the Pentagon's failing accounting systems. The investigators, journalists, and committees tracking the financial anomalies were instantly retasked toward national security, emergency defense appropriations, and the launch of the War on Terror. The tragedy didn't erase the math, but it permanently closed the window on an uncomfortable domestic financial reckoning. The nature of the damage at the Pentagon on September 11, 2001, specifically the relatively low initial hole, the horizontal trajectory, and the absence of a visible, intact commercial airplane sitting outside, has been one of the most persistent focal points for alternative theories and questions. To understand how American Airlines Flight 77 interacted with the building, why it looked the way it did, and what the physical evidence actually showed, it helps to examine the mechanics of the crash and the physics of high-speed structural impacts. Why did the plane strike the building horizontally like a missile rather than dropping from above? Flight 77 was a massive Boeing 757 traveling at roughly 530 miles per hour, about 850 kilometers per hour, as it approached Washington, D.C. In the final seconds, the hijacker pilot executed a high-speed 330-degree descending turn. By the time the aircraft lined up with the western facade of the Pentagon, it was flying almost parallel to the ground, skimming just above the lawn and striking light poles before hitting the building nearly level. Because a commercial airliner cannot dive vertically like a bird of prey without ripping its wings off due to aerodynamic stress, it hit at a shallow, near-horizontal angle. A common point of confusion is why the impact hole in the outer wall, the airing, looks surprisingly narrow, rather than showing the full 124-foot wingspan of a Boeing 757. Unlike the World Trade Center towers, which had steel column core structures designed around open floor plans, the Pentagon is an exceptionally rugged, fortress-like building constructed of multi-layered reinforced concrete and limestone. When a heavy aluminum aircraft traveling at over 500 miles per hour hits a solid concrete wall, the wings do not punch clean cutouts. Instead, the outer wings, which are relatively hollow and filled with fuel, shatter, fragment, and disintegrate instantly upon impact against the exterior columns. Only the dense, heavy central core of the aircraft, the engines, landing gear, and reinforced fuselage retained enough momentum to punch deeply through multiple inner rings of the building, tearing through the E, D, and C rings, creating a catastrophic structural collapse internally, rather than a neat silhouette outside. The belief that no airplane remains or debris were found stems largely from early live news broadcasts and photographs taken before investigators and cleanup crews cataloged the site. In reality, extensive wreckage was recovered from the scene, documented by federal investigators, firefighters, and military personnel. Official FBI and Department of Defense photographic evidence shows massive aircraft components recovered both outside on the lawn and deep inside the interior courtyards and rings. This included sections of the landing gear, heavy steel engine parts, compressor blades, cabin seats, luggage fragments, and pieces of the fuselage bearing American Airlines livery. Both of the aircraft's black boxes, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, were recovered from the rubble. Furthermore, forensic identification teams positively identified the remains of all 53 passengers, 6 crew members, and the 5 hijackers on board Flight 77 through DNA matching. While the chaotic, smoky aftermath captured by initial news cameras made it difficult for reporters standing at a distance to see large chunks of an intact plane, the structural, forensic, and photographic record confirmed that American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. It was a catastrophic collision governed by the brutal physics of a heavy commercial jet, hitting a reinforced concrete military fortress at high velocity. The approach into the Pentagon was not an accidental or random occurrence, and it required a high-speed, highly calculated piloting maneuver. Flight Data Recorder, FDR analysis, and National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, flight path reconstructions revealed exactly how the aircraft was flown in its final minutes. After turning away from its westward path over Ohio, the hijacked Boeing 757 flew south toward Washington, D.C., before executing a wide, sweeping 330-degree clockwise spiral turn. As the plane completed this turn, it lined up with the western facade of the Pentagon, diving from roughly 7,000 feet while accelerating to 530 miles per hour, about 850 kilometers per hour. To strike the building at ground level rather than plunging down from high altitude, which would have required an impossible vertical dive for a commercial jet, the pilot skimmed just feet above the ground, clipping light poles and a portable generator before hitting the first floor of the outer ring at a shallow, near-horizontal angle. While the lead hijacker pilot, Hani Hanger, had only basic single-engine civilian flight training and had previously struggled to fly smaller aircraft, executing a high-speed, low-altitude targeting run on a massive building required aggressive manual control adjustments in the final seconds. It was a deliberate, calculated suicide attack designed to maximize kinetic energy and structural devastation. The belief that numerous surveillance cameras near the crash site were instantly seized and hidden by the government is one of the most widespread talking points in 9/11 alternative lore. To understand why security footage became a point of intense public controversy, it helps to separate the real actions taken by investigators from the rumors that grew in the vacuum of the immediate aftermath. In 2001, high-definition, widespread closed-circuit television, CCTV networks, were nowhere near as ubiquitous as they are today. Around the Pentagon, exterior security cameras were limited. The primary angles came from a Department of Transportation security camera, mounted on a nearby highway toll booth bridge approach, and 2 low-resolution cameras, operated by the Pentagon itself, pointing toward a parking lot and a checkpoint gate. Nearby private businesses, such as a Citgo gas station and a Sheraton hotel across the interstate, also had exterior security cameras. Within minutes of the attack, FBI agents and law enforcement officials fanned out across the surrounding area to secure any and all available evidence. Agents did indeed immediately confiscate the security tape from the nearby Citgo station. However, when investigators later reviewed the tape, it was revealed that the camera's angle was pointed toward the gas pumps and parking lot, meaning it only captured the flash and smoke rising from the impact, not the aircraft itself hitting the building. In any major criminal or terrorist investigation, seizing local surveillance footage from surrounding businesses is standard operating procedure. Law enforcement secures the evidence to preserve chain of custody, examine flight paths, and rule out additional suspects or angles. Seizing a tape is not inherently a cover-up. It is what police do after any catastrophe. The primary source of public suspicion was not that the government seized tapes, but that they refused to release them publicly for years. When the official 9/11 Commission report was published in 2004, it did not include clear video footage of the plane striking the building. This triggered intense public speculation that the government was hiding something. The delay, however, was driven by two legal and bureaucratic realities. The Department of Defense argued that the security camera footage was evidentiary material tied directly to the federal prosecution of Zacarias Moussaoui, the only individual convicted in U.S. court for a role in the 9/11 attacks. Releasing trial evidence publicly before proceedings concluded was restricted. In December 2004, public interest legal group called Judicial Watch filed a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) lawsuit demanding the footage. Once the Moussaoui trial concluded, the Department of Defense officially released the raw, low-resolution security camera frames in May 2006. The grainy videos showed a fast-moving, white silhouette skimming low across the lawn before erupting into a fireball. While the low frame rate and resolution disappointed skeptics who wanted crystal-clear cinematic views, it matched the physical forensic evidence, flight data recorders, and eyewitness accounts. What looked like a sinister, intentional concealment of evidence was largely a combination of standard investigative seizure protocols, delayed bureaucratic friction, and the primitive state of 2001 security camera technology. If a classified black project office needs to siphon funds or obscure a line item for experimental aerospace research, like early disk craft development or advanced sensor integration, an inherently broken accounting system makes it remarkably easy to hide those transfers inside billions of dollars of unsupported adjustments and administrative noise. The $2.3 trillion didn't get packed into suitcases or secretly funneled entirely into hidden alien tech hangars. It represents decades of institutional waste, incompatible computer networks, and a sprawling military-industrial complex that historically refused to keep proper receipts. Yet, the irony remains absolute. The world's most technologically advanced military can track a missile down to the millimeter, but for decades it couldn't balance its own checkbook, creating a permanent financial fog that keeps the true scope of the black budget safely out of sight. It is one of the most jarring historical coincidences in modern history, and precisely why it remains a cornerstone of institutional distrust. When you look at the timeline, the silence is deafening. September 10, 2001, the Secretary of Defense publicly admits that the military cannot account for $2.3 trillion and declares war on the Pentagon's own financial bureaucracy. September 11, 2001, the world is violently upended. The Pentagon is struck. The news cycle resets instantly, and a nation goes onto a permanent wartime footing. September 12, 2001, and beyond, investigative journalists, congressional oversight committees, and evening news anchors who were poised to demand accountability for trillions of missing dollars immediately pivoted to terrorism, homeland security, and military defense appropriations. The audit trail was effectively buried beneath an avalanche of national trauma. The abrupt silence wasn't necessarily because everyone forgot. It was because the geopolitical reality of the world changed overnight. The priorities shift, in the shadow of 9/11, demanding that the military balance its checkbook suddenly felt, to many lawmakers and the public, like a petty distraction, while the country was mobilizing for war. National survival superseded fiscal accountability. The blank check era, the war on terror, ushered in an era of massive, fast-tracked emergency appropriations. Congress willingly opened the floodgates, pumping unprecedented trillions into the defense budget, with even fewer questions asked, prioritizing speed and security over red tape. The ultimate smokescreen. Whether the timing was a sheer, tragic accident of history, or the ultimate bureaucratic get-out-of-jail-free card, the effect was absolute. It permanently insulated the military's financial infrastructure from intense public scrutiny, just as the defense apparatus entered its most secretive, high-budget modern phase. It is precisely this kind of glaring, uncomfortably timed coincidence that fuels the public's enduring fascination with black budgets, deep state secrecy, and the feeling that we are only ever allowed to see the tip of the institutional iceberg. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Do you think Congress will ever successfully audit the black budget programs, or is the wall of financial secrecy simply too high to scale?